Welcome to A Dram of Outlander. This is Desiree, your podcaster and the writer for adramofOutlander.com for all things Outlander, from the Dinah Gabaldon book series to the Stars TV series and everything in between. This is episode 81, The Scottish Prisoner, week 13. Hello, the house! I am terrifically excited that we're inching closer to 100 episodes. Wow, that's going to be quite a landmark for the podcast when we get there. There wasn't a lot of news from the Outlander front this week, just some marvelous pictures on Instagram from Matthew Roberts under his No Fooling Productions account, and a really lovely photo from Caesar Dumboy, who's our grown-up Fergus, also on Instagram. I posted them on the A Dram of Outlander Facebook page. Let's get right to Chapter 25, Escape from Athlone. So Jamie and Tom returned to the inn. Quinn had stayed there when they went to Glasswig to see what was going on with John, and indeed did find him arrested. So Quinn is sitting by the fire. He's still shivering from that run in the rain that he did to tell them of John's arrest. And I'm still left with, how in the heck did Tobias Quinn know that Syverley was dead, know that John was arrested for it, and why? It's not like Glasswig was in the middle of the city. I imagine Jamie's asking himself some of those same questions, even though he's not saying them out loud. But he's sitting by this fire with a glass of Eric. So, of course, I've never heard of Eric, so I looked it up. It's a distilled alcoholic drink typically produced in South Asia and Southeast Asia. It's made from either the fermented sap of coconut flowers, sugarcane, grain, or fruit, depending upon the country of origin. I'm wondering who is so well-traveled, or who came in on a ship carrying this stuff and brought it to this pub, or to Quinn himself. That's quite an exotic drink to have in Ireland for the time. So Jamie nods to Quinn straight away to come with him, and Quinn got up and followed Jamie outside. And he doesn't want to be overheard by anyone, so they went down the road a bit. Jamie fills him in with all that happened. He thinks that Quinn took the news pretty well. This is what Jamie predicted, because of course Quinn is fairly happy and not unsettled one bit that John has been arrested for this murder. Jamie has a plan, because he expected Quinn to react this way. And so he looks at Quinn and he asks him if he still wants the Druid King's Cup. And Quinn perks up at this question. Quinn is very excited. That is part of his plan, his Jacobite plan, to get the Bonnie Prince on the throne. Of course, Quinn wants this cup. And he asks Jamie if he has it. No, Jamie doesn't, but he knows pretty much where it's at. And he tells Quinn it's currently out of reach because he told the abbot to put it back where he found it. And he's pretty certain that he did. Quinn is certain that someone at the monastery will know where that cup is. They will know where it was buried. I love Jamie's response to Quinn here. Aye, well, you want to go and ask them do that, but you're not going until we get John Grey out of Athlone. Quinn's strange light eyes bulged a bit. I imagine it to look like a cartoon. Out of Athlone Castle, man. Are you demented? I am. But I mean to do it anyway. Why? The man's not only English, not only your captor, he's a feckin' murderer. No, that he's not. He may be a good many disagreeable things, but not that. But they found him standing over Syverly's body and the blood fresh on his boots. I saw, aye. Why the devil do you think he didn't do the man in then? You heard what he had to say about him and all his talk about bringing the fellow to justice. You don't get more justice than a bullet through the head. So Quinn is pushing this idea very firmly that John absolutely is a murderer. Fascinating. Jamie knows that there is no point in trying to explain to Quinn that unless a death had been administered after a court-martial, John would not be satisfied and he would not see it as justice. So Jamie firmly simply says he didn't. And he cannot explain to Quinn what he knows to be true about John Gray. The only way that John would have killed Syverly is if it was in self-defense, as if he was under imminent threat himself. And he wasn't going to argue with Quinn anymore because it would be futile. And since we know that Gray did not kill Syverly, somebody else did. And there's a few people that could be on that list, and Quinn was one of them. Jamie wouldn't know why Quinn would do this, but it could have been him, and he's definitely not going to mention it because he has to be in Quinn's company for quite some time. I'm going to Athlone and you're going with me. What? Why? Where did you get off dragging me into it? Where did you get off dragging me into your bloody crackbrained scheme? You go with me and I'll take you to Abbot Michael. You could make your own case to him about the cupping. Crackbrained? Aye, crackbrained. And you're going with me to Athlone because you sail a boat and I can't. A boat? What boat? How do I know what boat? We'll find one when we get there. I like the back and forth between Quinn and Jamie. They can both get heated and passionate and have this air about them without taking one bit of offense from the other. I can't imagine that banter going so well these days. People's feelings get hurt over the slightest things. They are so thin-skinned in this world. And the way they talk to each other, they definitely have to be thicker-skinned to handle it. So as adamant as Quinn is about not absconding with Lord John through the countryside, Jamie is adamant that because the castle is near the River Shannon, and he knows the Shannon's navigable, that they're going to navigate it, and Quinn is going to help him. So Jamie's using the knowledge of the cup against Quinn. And Quinn has no other way of getting a hold of that cup. Yeah, but Michael wouldn't tell him a thing if he went there. So Jamie had left instructions to wee Tom Byrd to gather a few things for a quick journey. So they find Tom on the side of the road with some of their belongings, and he has gathered some cabbages and potatoes. Well, welcome to Ireland. I don't know if there would have been any simpler food to get a hold of easily, but that's what he has for them. He was impatiently waiting, and he gave them both side-eye. And Quinn assures him that will be a fine supper, and he pats Tom approvingly on the shoulder. Quinn is a consummate sales guy. He knows how to weave in and out of relationships and conversations. He knows how to get things done. There's a reason he's been around so long and survived. And he says it's going to be raining again, so they better find a place to cook quickly. The reference to peat fire burning here. We've seen peat throughout this book so far. We learned about the bog butter and the smell of the peat and how the peat can flavor things. And peat fires burned hot but gave little light. The fire at their feet was not much more than a sullen glow, as though the earth itself was burning from within. But it had cooked their food and warmed their feet. Some of their food. Lacking a pot, they ate the cabbage raw, despite Quinn's dire predictions of unparalleled flatulence. It's nae as though there's anyone to hear, is there? Oh, so practical, Jamie Fraser. The idea of eating a whole bunch of raw cabbage without proper preparation, yes. It would be quite a noisy evening, I'd imagine. And Jamie remembers that he's eaten much worse than raw cabbage, and he's eaten much worse than raw cabbage often. Jamie is somebody who is supposed to be a gentleman, a man of some means, a man of land and people he takes care of. Yet he's spent most of his adult life either imprisoned, paroled, or hiding. He hasn't much gotten a taste for that life that he should be leading. And there was something about those words, about the earth itself burning from within. What is that a reference to? Is it some reference to hell? Is it reference to the job they have at hand that is going to be very difficult? Is it guilt somewhere? I'm not sure what that means. Tom makes handy work. He has Lord John's dagger, remember? And he checks the potatoes that are now these little blackened knobs. He tells Jamie it's still a bit hard in the middle, but he doesn't think roasting them any longer would help. And Jamie doesn't care because he has all his teeth and none of them loose. All he has is a rapier, and he stabs them neatly and waves them in the air to cool. I can see him doing that with some sort of flair and elegance as they're sitting rough and eating these unseasoned potatoes. And Quinn, of course, is missing an eye tooth, we know. We don't know if he has any other loose teeth. But he's, has a response, but it's not rude. He's not sullen any longer, and his spirits seem to have risen, even though it's raining again. Quinn had really wanted to find supper and a refuge for the night with a cottager, but Jamie wants them to camp briefly and then go on as soon as they're rested. He knows that the news of them would spread like butter on hot toast, and then he thinks, butter. He's hungry, and he's got a tummy squirrel going on. He ignores it, as if to say, there's time to be hungry later. They could not afford to be picked up by a constable along the way. Enough people knew already that Lord John had companions, and Edward Twelvetrees was one of those people who knew. Did Twelvetrees know about Syverley yet? That's a very good question. He could have killed Syverley, who knows? Tom gathered the rest of the potatoes, and he gave some to Quinn, and then he sat down beside Jamie to eat his own share. Jamie hadn't told Tom about his plan And I said that with air quotes, but you can't see it. And he hadn't told Tom that Quinn wanted to abandon Gray in the prison. But he did notice and was pleased that Tom did not trust Quinn at all. He thought, Tom's a good lad. And so Tom sitting next to Jamie also showed where his thoughts lie. It showed where his loyalty was and who he trusted. He did not go and sit next to Quinn. He sat next to Jamie like he would have Lord John. And it was raining, and it struck the fire, and Jamie knew the fire would not last much longer. And Tom inquires how far it was to Athlone. Quinn thinks about it, and it's about 2 hours. And even in the dark, Jamie could feel Tom perk up and smile. When Jamie turned to smile at Tom, and he says, "We'll get him back." And he found himself to be gratified to see the relief and trust flood Tom's round face. So Tom was Team Jamie now. I think he understands why John trusts him so much, and he sees why that they have a friendship and something beyond officer and parolee. There's more there. Tom did not ask for details. He just says, "Yes, they will." And that was that. So Jamie wants Tom to sleep for a little while, and he says he'll wake him later when it's time to go. Quinn snorts, and Jamie ignores it. Of course, Quinn knows that Jamie doesn't trust him. And it's obvious that Tom knew that too. It didn't need saying. But yet somehow there's this trio banded together, even if it's only loosely held by the idea of that Druid King's cup. Jamie has a borrowed cloak, and he wraps it around his body, and he's wishing for a plaid and thick Highland stockings. Even though this cloak was wool, it's nothing like the walked wool of the Highland plaid. Even in these very odd circumstances, Jamie finds a way to find home. Even if he's missing it, he still finds it and calls it to him. He finds a place where his ass wouldn't be sitting in a puddle, and there was a stone at his back to lean on. Oh, that sounds downright comfy, doesn't it? We get to see often in this book the back and forth between how he and John do things, and they do things very similarly. They process, they plan. Now, where John goes in thinking he can never lose, Jamie has that air about him, knowing full well he might lose, even though he doesn't plan to. But he's sitting here with this noisy mind, and it's nagging him, and he wants to make plans. But like John saying you couldn't plan for contingencies, you do your best, but when you get there, you've got to think on your feet. Well, Jamie's doing the same thing here. Plans were pointless until they reached Athlone, and they saw how things lay. And he needed to let matters rest and sort themselves. So he's putting these things in the back of his mind. He's saying good night to them for now. Do you know how your brain does that when you can't figure a problem out? It's unsolvable at the moment. And then in the middle of some other task that you're doing, it could be a day, weeks, or months later, you get that proverbial light bulb over your head. And you know the answer? Well, Jamie's sticking it back in that part of his mind that will continue to problem solve until he can get back to it. He found his rosary and remembered that there was a matter of his penance after all. The wooden beads were smooth, and they were a comfort to him. And he went through the repetition of the Aves, and he finally relaxed. And there was the rain as counterpoint pattering on his hat. So there you go, as he says his prayers. And then it's not a crackbrained scheme. Quinn had spoken so quietly that Jamie had only half heard him, because he was getting into that space between awake and asleep. And then Quinn says again, it's not a crack-brained scheme. The plan. Jamie was having a hard time focusing as relaxed as he was. I? What plan? Perhaps I spoke too hasty, Quinn. I'll ask your pardon. Ever the gentleman. And this softened Quinn, and he went from hostility to forgiveness. Tom was curled in a lump, and he got up to crouch beside Jamie. And he calls Jamie Mahara. He says he didn't tell Jamie the real parts of it, the heavy parts, the meat of it, because it seemed too fanciful. And he was thinking, oh, Jesus, like, here it comes. And Jamie brought up the cup. And Quinn says that's only a part of it. But he hadn't told him how the invasion would work. The invasion. Jamie's peaceful mind turned into a nodding of his belly, and it wasn't the raw cabbage doing it. He knows that Quinn had mentioned raising an army, but there's much more to this story. It's something called the Irish Brigade. And Jamie knows he's heard of the Irish Brigade. Oh. There are 3 regiments of the Irish Brigade in London. 2 of the officers leading are with the Jacobites, and they plan on seizing the king and holding Buckingham Palace. This struck Jamie completely dumb. Jamie is rarely speechless, so the fact that Quinn could cause this with those words is amazing. Quinn goes on to say that there are loyal men in brigade posted in Italy and France, and if they're not loyal, then they'll be killed if they don't go along with it. And Quinn, of course, says, now then, you know as well as I do, you can't make wine without squeezing. Justification, And Jamie tells him, don't bloody say it. And Quinn continues to go on and talk about what each regiment will do when the signal comes, etc. This is concerning Jamie. This is the real deal. It's so much more than he thought it could be. And as he went on to speak, Jamie realizes he's not using English words throughout. He's using Irish words as well. And the word means rabid fighters and maniac poets, basically. So passionate people, fighting people. So this was in the Wild Hunt poem. And there's also a song called The Volunteer. It was almost the last song that he heard prior to that axe to the head severing him from music forever. And Jamie abruptly used an Irish phrase. And Quinn looked at him. In English, it's they search out blood, they seek its heat. Then there's a moment's silence except for the rain. The fire was drowned. But the cabbage was making its presence felt, and Jamie had to clench and silently tried to ease himself. And Quinn says to him, "Where did you hear that now?" And Jamie's life could hang in the balance on this answer. He tells him that Thomas Lally had said it to him when he met him in London. He did? So Quinn was surprised and worried about this, and maybe Lally wasn't part of the plot. But Quinn maybe was fearful that Lally knew about it. Jamie wants to know more. Is there a date? Quinn is suspicious, but he really wants to talk about it, and he wants to win Jamie over. He wants him as part of this plan. And he explains that it will be a crowded day where the beer is flowing from taverns, and there's people everywhere. The regiments will parade down Pall Mall, and he finishes his explanation. Wow. And so that's the plan, and it will spread. The supporters in Wales and Scotland will hear of it, and they'll be ready to march to take London. And Jamie thought this actually could work, because madder schemes had in the past. But Jamie is sure it can't be held for very long, even with the king's person to bargain with. What if there's a delay in Charles Stuart coming with the new army from Ireland? Yeah, he knows all about Charles Stuart and his army-raising abilities. And he called Bonnie Prince a weak reed for a revolution to lean upon. And surely to God, Quinn must know that much. Or was that what the conspiracy counted on? Quinn says, "Oh, that's been thought of. There are fallbacks. No one's going to do anything until they've heard the word." Jamie wants to know what the word is, but Quinn is not going to tell him. And Quinn leans back, and a loud fart rips the air beneath him and surprises him. Jesus, Mary, and Joseph. This even made Jamie laugh. Tom stirs, and a popping noise like distant gunfire emerges from the mound of wet blankets. Quinn raises an eyebrow. 3's a lucky number, so it is. They all three farted. Yeah, so they must be lucky tonight. The power of 3. I love that reference. I'm living in a very masculine house with all these males around me. That is my life in a nutshell right there. And we move away from this outdoor scene with Tom and Quinn and Jamie, and we get the insight to what John is experiencing. He says, or we get the viewpoint that he's never been a guest at one, though he's been to a great many prisons. He thinks this establishment was fairly reasonable. He had a slop bucket. It was empty and dry, and there was a small barred window. And though the walls were oozing damp, everything else in Ireland did, there were no puddles on the floor, and there was a blanket in the corner of the room for him to use. He was glad to see it, because the cell was bloody cold, and his clothes were damp, his linen clammy. They had been poured on the hour before they reached Athlone. So, to bide his time, he paced the dimensions of the cell. It's 8 by 10. If he were to walk 700 lengths of the cell, that would be approximately a mile. Has to stay fresh and keep his mind busy. At this point, he decides to shake out the blanket, and it contained a dead cricket, 2 live moths, and the broken fragments of what had once been a cockroach. What the devil had eaten it? Rats? He, like Jamie, uses humor in times of distress, and it's a way to diffuse the situation and maybe even his own mind and emotions. He's tired, and he sits on the floor with a blanket around him, shivering. Thinking would not do him much good at this point. He'd done a good amount of it on the ride there. It was good and bad that Sir Melchior was gone. Bad, because it meant that the sergeant of the garrison had locked him up. The deputy justiciar had not yet arrived, and the sergeant refused to summons the magistrate from the town until morning. And good, because Sir Melchior or his deputy would very likely have questioned Grey. Rather awkward, considering, and either put him under guard or demanded his parole. But both of those would have kept him from going back to Siverley's house or making his own investigation. Again, John has this sense of he'll prevail. He's going to go do his own investigation. There is no way Jamie's not getting him out of here. And he's going to be able to go back to Siverley's house. So is this privilege on his part? Is it him being confident? Is it arrogance? He's never been in a position that he can't win. Except for Jamie Fraser. So is he the mouse, the big mouse that John can never catch? We're getting a lot of insight into this man. And then he starts to think of Edward Twelvetrees. There had been no sign of him, and none of the servants had mentioned him being there. I mean, if he had been at Glastwig, he would have been noticed. So John thinks he wasn't there. Maybe because he had fled in the wake of the murder. So John is thinking that it was 12 that Grey heard, running from the summer house. And he did not go to the stable. Maybe he returned briefly to the main house, but why? So his brain is in overdrive. He's trying to put the pieces together from what he knows and fill in the blanks for what he doesn't know. Maybe there was something he had to get, or he realized that just running would be an admission of guilt. I mean, that chest of money was substantial. It would have taken at least 2 footmen to carry it. He doesn't think 12 could have picked it up and put it under his arm and ridden off with it. Grey found Siverley's body about noon. Had 12 showed up, left his horse, crept up to the summer house, and bashed in Siverley's head with what Grey recognized as the Iroquois war club. And then he thinks, doubtless, the weapon with which Siverley had attacked Jamie Fraser. He has a very noisy brain right now. Or did 12 not come back at all? Anything was possible. And Siverley could have had many enemies given his record. And did the possession of that war club mean that he was fearful for his life? But all the other things he collected seemed normal for being a military man. So John decides to close his eyes and try to find a comfortable position and just rest his head. But bloody hell, he simply didn't know enough. But he did know that he had to get out of here, and he had to go back to Glaswig as soon as possible. There was nothing he could do but wait for Jamie Fraser. Oh, I'm certain a good many of us would not mind waiting in a prison cell for Jamie Fraser to show up and release us. He did fall asleep, and the sound of feet on the paving stones woke him up. He couldn't tell quite what the time it was because the sky was overcast when he looked out his small window, but it had to be past midnight. So it's been, 12 hours roughly then since he found Siverly. He could see several men. So he decides to get up, put his shoes on, and button his waistcoat. Before any key could be in the lock. The door swung open, and the sergeant of the guard was there, lantern in one hand, and a look of apoplectic fury on his face. Only Jamie Fraser could make somebody have apoplectic fury, I'm pretty sure. And behind him loomed Jamie Fraser. I see you were expecting us. Have you got something to quiet this gentleman's humors? So he had taken a large horse pistol, and he sent the sergeant stumbling into the cell. And the sergeant yells at him and calls him a filthy cur. Your soul to the devil, you wicked Scotch dog. And Gray promptly puts his handkerchief balled up and stuffs it into his mouth. Tom Byrd runs in, seizes the blanket, and with a huge grin at Gray, uses the dagger to slice several strips off so they could secure the sergeant. And then Tom thrusts the dagger into John's hand. And he's so glad to see him looking well. It's as if he hasn't seen him in days. It's been hours. And Gray murmurs to Jamie, "Thank you, Mr. Fraser." Jamie hands him the lantern, then waves the pistol, ushering him out. With a cordial nod at the sergeant, he pulls the door softly behind him and locks it. And then Gray is horrified that he addressed Jamie by name and apologizes. Jamie shrugs, as he's wont to do. Nay bother. There's none say many red-headed Scotsmen o' my size aboard in County Roscommon. It wouldn't take them long to learn my name, and they would not require one to shoot me in any case. Come on, wee bird. Where are you? Again, his practicality shows. It would take little effort to figure out who this very large, red-headed Scot was. And they wouldn't even have to ask. They would shoot first. Tom conjures to presence, and he's excited. And they start to make their exit. He's wondering if Jamie should leave the lantern. And Jamie thinks he might need it. And it seems like they are taking the slowest pace possible, and it's agonizing John. And as they approached a bend, they could hear voices from somewhere below. Go on, my lord. We daren't stop. John is feeling exposed. He sees an open doorway across the courtyard, and there's light spilling from it. He thinks it must be the guard room, and he sees several soldiers and could tell them from the sudden hush, followed by laughter, groans, and exclamations that they were dicing. And he's praying that someone throw a 6. So they go around another bend, and now they're out of sight. But his ears are hammering, and it's silent below, but he can still hear the guards, he thinks, behind them. And he notices that Jamie's hair is plaited, but it's not clubbed. It swings gently between his shoulder blades, a snakelet of gold light from the lantern vanishing up the smooth auburn strands into darkness. And suddenly Jamie Fraser stops, and Gray almost runs into him. Jamie crosses himself and turns toward Gray. And he tells him there's somebody below them at the gate. And they have to try to not kill him. And he throws the lantern into the courtyard and makes a loud clank and goes out. He knows that the guard will think it's one of the other guards or men. And at this, Jamie strikes the man, falling into him. And it knocks the wind out of him, and the two of them are on the stones. And he tells Tom to get the gate, and now we get more action music. And they're trying to get out. Jamie is punching this man and trying to get him to go down. Finally, after kicking him in the balls, and Jamie's breathing like a grampus. So they're trying to figure out if this man has a pistol or something else on him. So he took this short sword, and he says it's more like a Roman gladius. From what I can see, a Roman gladius is between about 1.5 and 2 1/3 feet long. I wouldn't say that's a short sword, but apparently I don't know anything about swords. And Gray thought this was quite an unorthodox weapon, but he took it anyway. And he stopped and kicked the man before going after Jamie. The gate had been opened by Tom, and the River Shannon was within bowshot, but it was dark as pitch. Poor Jamie was limping. Remember, he has that terribly bruised shoulder and ass at this point. He was cursing in Gaelic under his breath, and Gray deduced the object of his wrath. Meaning Tobias Quinn. And even Tom gets in on it. Bloody hell. And he's concerned that Tobias may have left them. And Jamie says he's a dead man if he did. He wants to know if they're waiting for a boat. Yes. Quinn said he could find a boat. And now, what do? So Gray clutched the gladius in one hand and his dagger in the other. And it's not going to really help him if the entire garrison comes out of the gate after them. But then he shoves them at Tom. This was John figuring out that they could jam the gate, so it would take longer for the men to get out. So he ran down, grabbed a bunch of debris. Tom had gotten several things, and they were kicking it underneath the gate. And poor John's toes were going to be as blue as Fraser's arse. That's all they could do. There was no time to do anything else. There were shouts from inside the castle. And so Tom and Gray ran up the bank in the direction that Jamie had gone. The ground was really difficult traveling on. They stumbled and lurched and gasped, and they skidded in the mud. John even fell sideways with a splash. He'd stepped into a reed bed. He was gasping. Oh, it was a mess. This is not a clean getaway. There wasn't just a boat waiting for them with Tobias Quinn ready to navigate the Shannon for them. And now they're hearing pebbles against glass, and to John, that's shots. And he is sopping wet, and he has to crawl toward shore. And he's hearing more single shots and irregular pop, pop, pops. Could they be seen? And Tom, at this point, grabs him by the arm and hoists him onto shore. And then Tom is starting to speak and he says, let's. And then he has this grunt of surprise. And John knows that Tom has been hit. He's heard that astonishment before, and he thinks all too often a man's final comment on life. And all Tom can squeak is, arm. Something hit my arm like a hammer. It was so dark. It was as if they were inside. But John could make out the black smudge spreading on Tom's left arm. So he tries to get his ribbon out of his hair and tie it on Tom's arm to try and staunch the bleeding. But there's panic going on. There's rain coming. He's trying to focus. And his ribbon broke. So now he's sitting on the ground, pulling a sopping stocking from his foot. So he's going to make a tourniquet. He has to save Tom. And he's really aggravated because the ribbon broke. Tom is, and he says that he's going to have to say something to Jennings and Brown where he bought that ribbon from because it broke in time of need. Tom, he's quite the haberdasher, that one. So Gray is really worried about Tom. How injured was he? How serious was it? And was it only a flesh wound? So Tom is having a hard time getting up. His head is spinning. And Gray starts to look frantically for a heartbeat. And he finds one finally. And Tom is okay, though he's weak and shocked. But by now, the river gate is opening, and men are coming. And so John grabs Tom under the arms, wades back into the reeds, dragging him along. That is cold water. It is very dark. He has an injured man who is semi-conscious, right? And where the heck are Jamie and Quinn at this point? We figure that out now. So Jamie is in a boat with Quinn. And Quinn tells him to be quiet. And he says if he doesn't stop squirming, he'll tip the boat over. So he's hoping that Jamie's not going to be really sick again. But Jamie doesn't want him mentioning that at all. And Jamie knows and is very aware that less than an inch of wood separates his cringing buttocks from the cold black water of the Shannon. And this wood was leaking like a sieve. And he wants to know why they're not rowing. And Quinn explains it's a flat calm. And they're not going to go by Castle Athlone crying out for Tom and John. Jamie can see the bulk of the castle as they come around. And he thinks the intimation of hell was the more pronounced as he saw the river gate from which they had escaped now burst open, spilling red light and black, shouting figures caper demon-like on the bank of the river. So that earth reddened from within, burning from within that we saw in that peat fire. That goes with this to me. The bowels of hell. Hail Mary, Mother of God, he whispers. And he's trying to figure out where Gray and Tom are at this point. He can't see them. Nothing seemed to be moving. Nothing that looked like two men running. And they should be running, he thought. So the whole garrison is awake. Everyone is on shore with lanterns, swinging lights. The beams are going up and down the riverbank. And then he hears a quiet splash. Quinn had put an oar in the water and was sculling slowly to slow their progress. And then he wonders, what if they're not here? And Jamie is sure They're here. Jamie knows they would have followed him. I know I'm whispering so the soldiers don't hear us. I just realized I was doing that. So he was trying to be confident, but Quinn was not confident at all. And of course, he would be glad to leave the two English behind. Jamie's wondering where they would go. Maybe into the town? And Quinn wants to know how far does he want to go. Jamie says to turn around again, and they go back. And Jamie is praying. What if they did go to town? He'd have to send Quinn after them. But would he look for them? And then there's a heavy clunk on the side of the boat. A clunk. Clunk. And Jamie's trying to figure out what's going on. He leans over the side and nearly let out a skellock at the sight that greeted him. A wild-eyed, head-like Medusa protruding from the water a few inches from his hand, snaking hair in all directions and teeth bared in a ferocious grimace. That reminds me of how Jamie was seen here and there in the other books. And so John is mimicking that. We're really getting to see the parallels between John and Jamie and the things that they'll do, what they're capable of. The startling figure held what looked to be a large bundle in one arm, a sword of sorts. And Jamie gaped, open-mouthed. The figure gritted its teeth, then swung the weapon once more against the side of the boat with the peremptory clunk. Get us in. Of course, it's John. It's John holding on to Tom. Now, John is a small man. He's maybe 5'8". He's very strong and lithe, but he's not a large man. He's barely taller than Claire, who's in the books is 5'6". So he does not have this giant, masculine, manly build, even though he does have the build and strength of a soldier. Wow, Jamie did it. He got him out of the castle. It wasn't pretty. It wasn't efficient, but it worked. Chapter 26, Opium Dreams. We've seen the use of opium in this book before. It's when Jamie was so sick on the travel from England to Ireland. And Quinn had popped up with his potion, and Jamie drank a lot of it, so he knew he would deeply pass out and hopefully not be talking in his sleep. But it causes hallucinations and very vivid dreams. John is in a heap in the bottom of the boat. He is barely aware of Jamie's back in front of him. Jamie's arms stretched and pulled, shoulders bunching as he rowed steadily upstream. And the castle slowly disappeared behind them. There were some shouts from the shore, and Quinn standing in the boat, clinging to the mast and shouting back in Irish. But Gray was too dazed with cold and exhaustion to worry about what he was saying. So, of course, Quinn has to get the last words in, no? So Quinn asks how Tom is, and he's curled up next to John, and he's shivering. They both were shivering, even though they had the cloaks, and they were wrapped in them, but they were in the water for a while. Oh, Tom was in pain. His teeth were clenched, and Gray just put a hand on his valet's head, trying to comfort him. And he said they need to loosen the tourniquet at this point, because if it's on too long and too tight, he could lose his whole arm. So Quinn goes to work on it. But as he leans over, Gray notices that he smells of peat and sweat and sausage. It was strangely comforting. Things of normalcy. So Quinn starts speaking very soothing as he works. Let me have a bit of a look now. Ah, there I have it. The sorrow and the woe. Now you'll be holding quite still, Mr. Byrd, and I'll just... And Gray feels the warmth of Quinn's body, and he finds it soothing to have his presence there, and to have Jamie's presence near. It's the knowledge of escape. Poor wee Tom was making whimpering noises, and Gray just curled his hands in Tom's damp hair, and he was rubbing him a little, distracting him like a dog getting a tick removed. Ah, now. Almost there. Aye, that's got it. Almost there. Aye, that's got it. Tom gasped, because now the rush of blood was going into the wounded arm, and the numbness was no longer. And they assessed the bleeding. It's not spurting, but it was bad, Tom, Quinn had said. And he pulls out that familiar black bottle of opium tonic. It's as well I brought the tonic, thinking Jamie might need it for the puking. Sovereign for what ails you, the maker says, and I'm sure that includes gunshot wounds and cold. Hey, why not? It's medicine. He gave it to Gray. Gray took a modest gulp, even though it smelled terrible. He coughed, and his eyes streamed, and his chest heaved. But there was that undeniable sense of warmth in his center. So Quinn was rewrapping Tom's arm, and now holding the bottle for him to drink. Tom swallowed twice, and he coughed. Gray drank more. A few sips, but his head was swimming already. I mean, they haven't had food. They're exhausted. They don't weigh very much. And he begins to feel drowsy. A drowsy peace, as he puts it. Tom is snoring already. Jamie calls back and says, "How are you, Bird? How are you, wee bird?" But that's all he hears is snoring. He'd fallen asleep in the middle of bandaging. He'll need a doctor. And Jamie asks if he knows one. And Quinn knows that Jamie does, that they can take him to the monks at Inishclara. And Jamie thinks, it's 10 miles at least to Inishclara. He can't row that far. And I love Quinn, because he knows the Shannon, right? You'll not need to, you ignorant Jackeen. What do you think this sail's for? There's no wind, and Jamie thinks it requires wind, and there isn't any. And when you shall have, my rosy bearded friend. And he goes on to explain that at sunrise the wind comes up off of Loch Derg, and it's like the breath of dawn, as the good book says. This is one of the things I really enjoy about Quinn, is that no matter what he's doing, no matter what's happening, he's always quoting scripture, referring to God. He goes back to that. He leans on it. It's about 4 hours till dawn. They can row a little bit more, and they'll be in the Loch Ree. Then they can turn out of the current and rest until daylight. At this, Jamie makes that low Scottish sound in his throat, but he still moves the oars against the heave of the Shannon's current. And Gray falls asleep to the rhythmic sloshing of the oars. Bizarre dreams. And he was having erotic visions with a naked Quinn. They were so vivid that he had to scrub at his mouth and spat to rid himself of the taste. It was not the Irishman he was tasting, but it was that damn tonic. And he had a ginger-tasting belch rise up. And he notices that he's physically enmeshed with Tom. He was lying so close to him, and his face was pressed against Gray's chest. And he notices that there's no motion, and they're alone in the boat. Well, I can see that giving someone erotic dreams. You have someone laying on your chest, breathing. Yes. Poor Gray. It was close to dawn at this point, and he had to fight to keep his eyes open. And he was fighting to not recall the details of his recent dream. He didn't even wonder where Fraser and Quinn had gone. He was too groggy for that. And then he hears their voices. Remember when Jamie woke up from that opium and the woman, the barmaid, pouring coffee had 3 breaths? Yeah. Well, so this is the space of mind that Lord John is in. They were near the boat, on land. Well, of course they're on land, he thought vaguely. He just could not think clearly. He was seeing the two of them sitting on clouds, arguing. They were arguing. Jamie says he won't do it. And Quinn accuses him of turning his back on the men he fought with. All that blood that was spilt for the cause. Jamie says he will turn his back. And so would Quinn if he had sense of a day-old chick. And Gray is totally hallucinating still. Gray melts into a red-eyed Banty rooster crowing in Irish and flipping its wings, darting pecks at Fraser's feet. Fraser seems to be naked, but was somewhat disguised by drifts of vapor from the cloud he was sitting on. Man, that opium is quite a trip. I never plan on taking it. I don't think I would like it very much. And then the vision melts into some kind of mildly erotic twinning of Stefan von Namsen with Percy Wainwright. And he watches it. And then von Namsen evolves into Gerald Siverly. And the ghastly wound in his head did not seem to hamper his movements at all. This sounds horrifying to me. Poor John. But then Tom starts to moan. He's sweating and queasy, and he finds a little boat gliding under sail along the shore of a flat green island in Ishclara. So he had gone back to sleep and was dreaming. He feels disembodied. He's not sure how to walk, and he's staggering behind Fraser and Quinn. They were hauling Tom Byrd and trying to be gentle and encouraging. Those dreams were mingling with the mist through which they walked, and he was remembering the words he'd overheard. Now he wants to know how the conversation had ended, but he has no idea. Yes, I'm thinking opium is a pretty wicked thing, and I don't understand how people could be addicted to it. It sounds terrible. So even though John didn't give a really good description, if they're back at Inishclara, that means they're back at the monastery where Abbot Michael is. And they're going to see if they can get some doctoring for Tom Byrd. And then Jamie will keep his word and appeal to the abbot on behalf of Quinn to get that Druid King's cup. So what did all this mean? When Jamie had that weird vision of the barmaid being 3-breasted, and that stuff seemed very straightforward when it comes to hallucinations, John's is a little different. I get the mild eroticism, considering he had a man pressed against his body with full weight, and he was breathing on him, and his head was on his chest. And maybe he was thinking of the last people he had been with, and then the concerns of Series. So it was all jumbling up together. So maybe it does make sense. I had to say it out loud. So next time we will be in chapters 27 and 28, and we'll be looking at Jamie's loyalty and his duty. It'll be interesting to see what happens next. We are about a little more than halfway at this point, and I love how we're getting to know these characters. I mean, this is some much more detailed information that we get about John Gray that I think we get in all of the Outlander books. I mean, if someone doesn't read this book and then go through his series, he's much more one-dimensional in the other books. We get little sneak peeks, but you have to look behind Oz's curtain, which is his series, to really find out what makes him tick and how, and to really get that feel for him. I mean, I'm thinking we're seeing in this book immense parallels between him and Jamie. They are very similar in how they do things and how loyal they are, and how they process, how they think, how they attack problems. They are both willing to do whatever is necessary, whether they want to do it or not, whether it's in their personal best interest or not. They will do what's right. They are very similar. Jamie's a bit more of a realist. Though he'll do these things and he'll have a plan to win, he also understands that he might not win. And he's been in the position of no win more times than he's won. He's been on the receiving end of no wins, right? Of losing and being held accountable for that. Will John? Will he have those experiences too? Or will he be able to continue in that confidence, near arrogance, that he's just going to be on the winning side? I don't know. We have to go into the future to find those things out. So now we were looking at who killed Syverly. 12 Trees? Was it Quinn? Could it have been somebody else altogether? Where's 12 Trees? What about that treasure of money? We know it wasn't John. We have Quinn in this enormous plan, an invasion of England, and that there are people throughout Europe who would support it and that would come to it if necessary. Wow. Another Jacobite uprising. Well, we know from history, if that was going on, it didn't work, correct? And Jamie knows that history was never altered forward, that England never fell as they knew it. So no matter what the plan is, he knows it's not going to be executed or won. And then we have to think about, what was all that money for? Was Syverly a Jacobite? Is 12 Trees a Jacobite? Will Jamie get released from his parole for doing his duty here? Is Tom Byrd going to be okay? Will he lose his arm? What about this magic Druid King's Cup? Where does that come into play? Are we going to see more of it? So many unanswered questions. And how are they going to stay clear of the law at this point? He broke John out of Castle Athlone. There's a lot of loose ends here that we have to get tied up. And somehow they have to get out of Ireland and back to England. Phew, that was a lot. So where can you find A Dram of Outlander? Well, of course, the website is adramofOutlander.com. On Facebook, it's a Dram of Outlander page that's open to everyone, and there's a private group of the same name that you have to ask to join. Instagram and Twitter is Dram of Outlander without the A in the front. On Wednesday nights, we have the standing Twitter chat. It's under hashtag ADOO. It's 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern Time. How do you support the podcast? Just get involved, talk to each other, chat with other followers of the social media pages, comment on the post. Please share the written post, share the podcast itself. Please, please, please go to iTunes if you listen there, or even if you don't and you have iTunes, and put a review for me. It'll help other people find me. But if I have positive reviews, it puts me higher in the search. You can, of course, financially support the podcast. You can send a one-time offering, and you have to email me at contact@adramofoutlander.com, or you can go to patreon.com/adramofoutlander and do a monthly offering. And if you have comments or questions or thoughts, please email me or call into the voice line at 719-425-9444. If you'd like to come on and be a guest with me for part of the podcast, drop me an email or leave me a message on the voice line. I would love to have you. And I hope you have another fabulous week. And if it's difficult, that you will work through it. And thank you for listening. I feel very blessed to have you all with me. Slán Живá.